Today we want to give you viewers a different view of your backyards. A lot of times you look out and you see the trees and the flowers, but you need to look up as well. And visiting with us today is Elan. Grant is Division Forester with Public Service Company of Oklahoma, and we want to give you tips on how to coexist with the electricity that runs through your backyard. Grant, thanks for being with us today. And I think a lot of people realize that trees around power lines have to be trimmed occasionally, and that power companies are asking people to plant smaller trees. But can you explain to viewers just what is up on those power lines first off?
Sure, Sue. Thanks for the opportunity. Actually, when the power lines go through people's backyard, everybody thinks that all of the lines are electrical. Well, that's not necessarily the case. In fact, if you go by voltage, the lowest voltage is the one lowest on the pole. So in the case behind me, the TV and telephone lines are the lowest, and then the next up are the secondary voltage, and then the highest voltage are the ones on the top of the pole.
Okay, and so when you're trimming trees around a neighborhood, is that the reason that sometimes lower limbs are left because they're not owned by your company, or?
Well, actually, when we first began tree trimming, we thought that it was best to clear everything out from ground to sky. And we've done a tree survey to find out how different species grow, and we found out that it's not necessarily all that important in many cases to trim all of the branches. So based on the species and the type of power lines, the voltages in those power lines, we can leave some lower limbs in many cases.
Okay, well, and also it's interesting, before we started taping, Grant was telling me about this survey they took, and that different species do in fact grow back at different rates. And I guess back here is a prime example with this sycamore.
Yes, this large sycamore. This is a secondary voltage with some primary voltage. And if you'll notice where the trunk of the tree is coming up out of the ground, it's really close to the easement area. Well, unfortunately, with a case like this and a large variety tree, we don't have a whole lot of room to be flexible.
Right.
So we had to trim basically all of the branches off using proper arboriculture trimming practices, but still we had to take the whole side of the tree off to get proper clearance for safety and reliability of electricity. But this has been about 2 years since the tree was trimmed, and you can see the regrowth that's come back out.
It's tremendous, and it hasn't gone back straight into the lines. It's real surprising. You'd think that in 2 or 2.5 years it would be completely covering the lines, and there's a case of that species grows back slowly.
One of the things that a lot of the customers ask, well, why can't you just come back every year? Well, as everyone knows, the economy is such that we can't afford to do lots of things that we would like to do. So we have to do the most good for the most people for the longest amount of time. And in doing that, we have looked at our tree survey and found out that various species grow a certain amount of time for 3 years, 5 years, and we're trying to trim for at least a 3 to 5 year clearance.
Okay, and that gives you a larger window. Well, when the power goes off, of course, people, they get very upset if there's a big storm or windstorm or what have you, and a lot of times they're calling that hotline with PSO or with OG&E and other parts of the state and wondering, why is my power not on? What is the criteria, or what are your priorities for trimming in emergency situations?
Well, that's a very good question, and the person that's way out in the middle of nowhere, or the person that's sitting in the middle of town, they all think, hey, my power's off, I want to be on right now. But the way the utility company looks at it is they're based on the main feed power lines. The ones that have the most voltage in it have the most customers on them. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get the most people back on the quickest as possible. So the people that live on the main power lines are usually going to come back on before the people that live on the small lateral lines that go off into neighborhoods.
And so if they're at the very end of that line, they'll be the last one to get the power on?
In many cases, that is what happens. But sometimes, if it's a tree limb that laid across the main power line and knocked everybody off, when we get that limb off, everybody comes back on. But unfortunately, that's not always the case.
Right. Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about the case of an easement. And what exactly is an easement, and how far approximately does that go under the lines?
Well, that's another good question. A lot of people really don't understand what easements are. And in fact, an easement is given by the property owner to the power company in this case, which says, you, the power company, have the right to use my property to provide me with electricity and everyone else along this area.
Okay.
So what that easement in essence says is when the power lines are back here, whether it's TV, telephone, electric, or whatever, then that company has the right, if you will, to come in and maintain their facilities. Again, whether it's TV, telephone, or electric. And with electric, because of the electricity, it is a safety hazard.
Right.
So therefore, we have to do a whole lot more precautionary things than TV or telephone. We have to trim trees more severely than TV or telephone. We're also having to do it on a more frequent basis than TV or telephone.
Now, can people, they can still plant things under there and use that part of their yard though, but you've got some criteria that you want people to follow so it won't go into the lines?
Mother Nature and birds do a very good job of planting whatever tree they want right there. So whenever a person is planting a tree, it's always a good idea to plant shrubs or small variety trees. If the only place you have to plant is under the power lines, then please let it be a small variety tree or shrubs.
Okay, and good examples are redbud, dogwood.
Redbud, dogwoods. You know, you also want to consider the species of the tree, because you just don't want to go stick any tree out there.
Sure.
It's got to be appropriate for the site.
Okay, but just what's the ultimate height, maybe to give people a guideline if they're looking at how tall a tree is going to be ultimately? What's the maximum they should?
Well, most small variety trees in a good growing condition top out about 25 feet, and that's just about generically where the power lines begin, somewhere right in that area.
Okay.
Now, keep in mind, if you do plant a redbud or a pear or a dogwood or something back there, that doesn't mean we won't ever have to trim it. That means we won't have to do a lot of severe trimming. We'll still need to do some clipping on the limbs in the future.
Great. And last of all, if they're going to do a huge spreading tree like a mighty oak or whatever.
Or a big sycamore.
Big sycamore, good example. And you're planting it, it's not the birds that have planted there and seedling coming up. About how far back from the line should they try to be on a large tree?
What a lot of people don't do is they don't think long term.
Right.
And it takes a large variety tree anywhere from 25 to 30 years to really reach its large potential. And then it can live for a long time after that. So keep in mind, like the sycamore, for example, in the back. It's got a possible spread of about 45 to 50 feet wide. Well, if you don't want it ever trimmed from the power lines, then you need to look at 45 or 50 feet away from the power lines. Unfortunately, a lot of people's backyards aren't that deep.
That's right.
So they need to keep it as far away from the power lines as possible.
So maybe put the large tree in the front yard if your yard lot is real small. Those are real helpful tips, Grant. Thanks for visiting with us.
It's been a great pleasure.
Great. Well, and we want y'all to keep in mind, before you plant something in the ground, be sure you look up first and think about where those plants are going.
We hope you enjoyed this video. It's part of our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. You can also find more recent videos on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.